The words hit like ice water. You're just a useless burden. I'd be better off without you. My 32-year-old son spat this at me while lounging in my living room, rent-free, bills-free, responsibility-free. I stood up, walked past him without a word, and began packing the freeloader's things. Everyone's patience has a breaking point, and today I reached mine. You have no idea how fast I'm about to rip him out of his comfort zone and slam him face first into cold, hard reality. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Dad, you got any cash? I need to pick up some things today. I looked up from my morning coffee to see Marcus standing in the kitchen doorway, still in the same wrinkled t-shirt he'd worn yesterday. The smell of stale beer and unwashed clothes followed him like a cloud. My stomach tightened, that familiar knot that formed every time he asked for money, which had become as routine as sunrise. What kind of things? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be vague. Just stuff, you know? He shrugged, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a beer. 10:47 a.m. The condensation from the can dripped onto the kitchen floor I'd mopped just last night. When did this become normal? The thought hit me like a slap. When had I stopped questioning why my 32-year-old son needed beer money before noon? When had I started accepting that stuff was an adequate explanation for why I should empty my wallet again? Marcus, we need to talk about you finding work. It's been 8 months since— Christ, Dad, not this again. He cracked open the beer with one practiced motion. The economy's shit. Nobody's hiring. What do you want me to do? Flip burgers? The contempt in his voice made my chest tighten. I remembered being his age, working 3 jobs to support him after his mother left, coming home with hands stained from factory work and grease under my fingernails. Flipping burgers would have seemed like a vacation. There's no shame in honest work, I said quietly. For you, maybe. He took a long swig, and I watched his Adam's apple bob. This is my son, I thought, the boy I used to carry on my shoulders who used to think I was the strongest man in the world. But I went to college. I have standards. The college I'd paid for with my retirement savings. The degree he'd earned in communications and then promptly decided wasn't what he wanted to do. The career counseling sessions I'd funded, the networking events, the professional wardrobe that now hung in his closet gathering dust. Son, maybe if we worked on your resume together. My resume is fine. The problem is this whole goddamn system. His voice was getting louder, more aggressive. I could feel the neighbor's judgment seeping through the walls. Mrs. Patterson next door had stopped making eye contact with me at the mailbox months ago. You wouldn't understand. You've never had real ambition. The words landed like physical blows. 37 years at the plant, working double shifts during the holidays so he could have the latest video game console. The promotion I'd turned down because it would have meant relocating, disrupting his schooling. The sacrifices I'd made, not grudgingly, but gladly, because that's what fathers do. I had ambition, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to give you everything I never had. Well, congratulations. His laugh was bitter, cutting. You gave me a front row seat to watch you settle for mediocrity. Real inspiring, Dad. I felt something crack inside me, like ice breaking under pressure. This kitchen, where I'd taught him to scramble eggs. This house, where I'd read him bedtime stories and helped with homework and celebrated every small victory. All of it suddenly felt hollow. You're just a useless burden, he said, finishing his beer and crushing the can. I'd be better off without you. The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. I set my coffee can carefully, my hands steadier than I felt inside. I'm sorry. What did you just say to me? Something in my tone must have registered because Marcus's cocky smirk faltered slightly, but only slightly. You heard me, Dad. You're a burden, a dead weight. He gestured around the kitchen with his empty beer can. Look at this place. Look at your life. You think I want to end up like you? My throat felt dry as sandpaper. Marcus, I want you to think very carefully about what you're saying to me. Why? You afraid to hear the truth? His voice was getting bolder now, feeding off what he mistook for weakness. I'm 32 years old, and I'm stuck living with my loser father because you never taught me how to be successful. You never showed me what winning looks like. Be careful, some voice whispered in my head. This is your son. Choose your words. But another voice, one that had been silent for too long, was starting to speak up. Explain to me how providing for you for 32 years makes me a burden, I said quietly. Because you made me soft. The words exploded out of him. You made me think the world owed me something, just like you think it owes you. But newsflash, Dad, nobody owes us anything. And frankly, I'm tired of being dragged down by your low expectations. I nodded slowly, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The room seemed to grow very quiet, very still. I see, I said, standing up from the table. I walked past him toward the hallway, my steps measured and deliberate. Behind me, I heard him call out, "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. Instead, I went to the linen closet and pulled out the large duffel bag I'd bought him for college, the one he'd never returned after dropping out junior year. Then I walked to his room and began shoving his clothes inside. Dad, what the hell are you doing?" I could hear panic creeping into his voice now, but I didn't stop. Shirts, jeans, the expensive sneakers I'd bought him last Christmas, everything got thrown into the bag with sharp, efficient movements. "Old man, are you having some kind of breakdown? Stop touching my stuff." I emerged from his room carrying the bag, walked past him again, and headed for the front door. The morning air was crisp as I hurled his belongings onto the porch with a heavy thud. "You said you'd be better off without me," I said, turning to face him. "Let's find out if you're right." "What the hell, Dad?" Marcus's voice cracked like a teenager's, the bravado evaporating in real time. He stood in the doorway, staring at his belongings scattered across the porch like roadkill. "You can't just throw me out. This is my home, too." I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this scene unfold from somewhere outside my body. The morning sun caught the beer cans he'd left on the porch railing from last night. 4 of them, lined up like soldiers. "You're home?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "When did you start paying rent? When did you start contributing to utilities, groceries, the mortgage I've been carrying for 15 years? That's not the point." He was sputtering now, his face flushing red. "You're my father. You're supposed to take care of me." The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 minutes ago, I was a useless burden. Now I was supposed to be his caretaker. "I did take care of you," I said, "for 32 years. But you just told me you'd be better off without me, so I'm giving you that chance. You're being ridiculous." I was frustrated, okay? I didn't mean, "Oh, you meant every word." I stepped back into the house. "You meant it when you called me mediocre. You meant it when you said I never amounted to anything. You meant it when you said I was a burden." His face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "Fine. You want to play hardball, old man? You'll see what I'm capable of. You think you can just toss me aside like garbage? I'll show you exactly who you're dealing with." I closed the door quietly and turned the deadbolt. The house felt different with him gone, lighter somehow, but also eerily quiet. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to him pounding on the door and shouting threats that grew more distant as he presumably went to retrieve his belongings. Maybe he's right. The thought crept in as I walked to the kitchen. Maybe I did fail him. Maybe if I'd been tougher, set better boundaries, hadn't been so soft. I began washing the dishes from breakfast, his untouched plate still sitting on the counter. The eggs had gone cold, the toast soggy. 32 years of untouched plates, I realized. How many meals had I prepared that he'd ignored or criticized? His mother always said I was too lenient. Maybe if I'd listened to her, maybe if I'd been the kind of father who demanded respect instead of hoping for love. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered against the kitchen floor, ceramic shards scattering like my thoughts. I stared down at the pieces. The mug he'd made me in 2nd grade, lopsided and painted with uneven blue stripes. "World's best dad," it had said in his careful 7-year-old handwriting. The irony cut deeper than any of his words ever could. I swept up the ceramic shards of that broken mug, each piece carrying a memory I no longer wanted to hold on to. The self-doubt that had been creeping in like fog suddenly lifted, replaced by something much clearer and more focused. Enough. 32 years of second-guessing myself, of wondering if I was too soft, too harsh, too this, too that. 32 years of making excuses for behavior that had grown progressively worse. Marcus had made his position crystal clear this morning. I was a burden he'd be better off without. Well, time to teach him what being without me actually meant. I settled into my home office, the same cramped space where I'd balanced our family budget for decades, where I'd researched colleges for him, where I'd written countless recommendation letters for jobs he'd never kept. The irony wasn't lost on me that this would be where I dismantled the safety net I'd spent a lifetime weaving. First, the car, a 2020 Dodge Charger that I'd co signed for when he was 28 and just needed a chance to get back on his feet. The monthly payments of $428 came directly from my checking account, as they had for the past 4 years. I pulled up the auto loan website and navigated to the payment settings. It took exactly 3 clicks to remove my automatic payment authorization. Next, his cell phone. Family plan, of course. He'd been on my plan since he was 16, upgrading to the latest iPhone every 2 years, like clockwork. Another few clicks, and his line was suspended. Let him figure out how to communicate his threats and demands without my subsidized data plan. His credit cards, the ones where I was listed as the primary account holder, responsible for payments he'd never made. The Amex with the $8,000 balance from his business venture that had lasted all of 3 weeks. The Visa he used for DoorDash orders and gaming subscriptions. I methodically went through each account, removing my payment information and setting the accounts to close. The gym membership, the streaming services, the car insurance. Thread by thread, I was unraveling the comfortable web that had kept him suspended in perpetual adolescence. Each canceled automatic payment felt like lifting a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. Marcus had tagged me in a post. When your own father throws you out on the street because he can't handle honest criticism. Some people can't face the truth about their failures. Toxic parents hatched ungrateful. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the likes and sympathetic comments pour in from his friends, most of whom I'd fed at family barbecues over the years, kids I'd driven to soccer practice alongside Marcus, young adults I'd helped move apartments, and loaned money to when times were tough. The old me would have been devastated, would have called him immediately, apologizing and begging him to come home, would have worried about what people thought, about my reputation in the neighborhood, about whether I really was the monster he was painting me to be. But sitting there, looking at the list of canceled services spreading across my computer screen like a battle plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Maybe he was beyond saving. Maybe 32 years of unconditional support had created something irredeemable. Maybe the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call me his hero was gone forever, replaced by this bitter stranger who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as obligation. If that was true, then at least I'd finally learned to live with the truth instead of the fantasy I'd been clinging to. I screenshot his post and saved it to a folder I labeled Evidence. Something told me I might need it later. The call came at 11:23 a.m. the next morning from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Dad, it's me. Marcus's voice had lost yesterday's venom, replaced by something that might have passed for casual if I hadn't known him better. The studied nonchalance of someone trying to sound like they weren't panicking. Marcus, look, I got some weird notifications this morning, something about my car payment and phone service. I think there might be some kind of technical glitch with your bank or something. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, even after everything he'd said, he was trying to frame this as my mistake, my problem to solve. There's no glitch, I said calmly. I canceled the payments. A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge. Dad, come on, don't be dramatic. We had a little fight, it happens, but you can't just, I can, and I did. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. Look, I said some things I maybe shouldn't have, but you're being way too sensitive about. Stop. The word came out sharper than I intended. You called me a useless burden. You said you'd be better off without me. Those weren't words spoken in anger, Marcus. That was what you really think. I was frustrated. You were honest. For probably the first time in years. I stood by my kitchen window, looking out at the empty driveway where his Charger used to sit. Being a man means dealing with the consequences of your words and actions. You wanted to be better off without me? Here's your chance. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. We need to sit down and talk about this like adults. Adults pay their own bills, Marcus. Adults don't live rent-free with their parents. Adults take responsibility for their choices. I kept my voice level, matter of fact. You're 32 years old. Figure it out. I hung up before he could respond. The rest of the day passed quietly. I went to the grocery store and bought exactly what I needed for myself. No more bulk shopping, no more cases of beer I didn't drink, no more frozen pizzas and energy drinks. The checkout total was less than half of what I usually spent. I was heating up leftover soup for dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood freeze. Julia, my ex-wife. The woman who'd walked out on us 15 years ago, claiming I was emotionally unavailable and failed to provide the life she deserved. Julie and I hadn't spoken in almost 3 years, not since Marcus's 30th birthday when she'd shown up drunk and made a scene about how I'd ruined both their lives. I let it ring twice more before answering. Hello, Julia. Well, David. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp, condescending, with that particular tone that had made me feel 2 inches tall throughout our marriage. I just got a very interesting call from our son. Our son, as if she'd been present for any part of raising him after she walked out. Did you now? Don't you dare use that flat tone with me. Marcus told me what you did. Throwing him out on the street like garbage, even for you, David, this is low. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd gotten every time she'd started one of her character assassinations during our marriage. He told you his version of events. His version? Her laugh was bitter. Oh, that's rich. Let me guess. You're the victim here, right? Poor David. So misunderstood. I'm not claiming to be a victim of anything. Good, because you're not. You're a grown man who just abandoned his own child because your feelings got hurt. Marcus is sleeping in his car, David. In his car. Because his father is too much of a narcissist to admit he was wrong. The words hit exactly where she'd intended them to. She'd always been a surgeon with language, knowing precisely where to cut. Marcus is 32 years old, I said quietly. He's not a child. He's our child, and he's struggling, but instead of helping him, you throw him away like you threw away our marriage when things got tough. You never could handle real responsibility, could you? Real responsibility. 15 years of single parenthood, working double shifts, missing sleep and meals and any semblance of a social life. Apparently none of that counted as real responsibility. Julia, you left us. You walked out when he was 17 because you decided you deserved better. I left because you were weak, because you had no ambition, no drive. And look what you've done to Marcus. You've made him just like you. Dependent, unmotivated, settling for mediocrity. The irony was staggering. She was describing exactly what Marcus had become, but somehow it was still my fault. You've always been a failure, David, as a husband and now as a father. Marcus is suffering, and it's all because you can't handle being told the truth about yourself. The truth? Something in my voice must have changed because she paused. The truth is that I've supported Marcus financially and emotionally for 15 years after you abandoned him. The truth is that he lives rent-free in my house, eats food I buy, drives a car I pay for, and uses a phone that's on my plan. And yesterday he told me I was a useless burden and that he'd be better off without me. He was frustrated. He was honest. For probably the first time in years. I could hear my own voice getting steadier, more controlled. And now he's sent you to fight his battles for him because he doesn't want to face the consequences of his words. You're pathetic, she spat. A real man would. A real man would what, Julia? Continue enabling a 32-year-old who thinks the world owes him everything? Continue being an ATM for someone who has nothing but contempt for me? Don't you dare turn this around on... I'm not turning anything around. I'm stating facts. Marcus made his position clear. Now he gets to live with it. The line went quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was venomous. You'll regret this, David. Mark my words. When something happens to him, when he hits rock bottom because his own father turned his back on him, that blood will be on your hands. The line went dead. I sat there in my quiet kitchen processing what had just happened. Marcus hadn't just called his mother for sympathy or support. He'd weaponized her against me, knowing exactly what buttons she'd push, knowing exactly how her voice would affect me. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This wasn't even about tough love or consequences. This was warfare. And my son had just fired the first real shot. I sat there in my quiet kitchen, processing what had just happened. Marcus hadn't just called his mother for sympathy or support. He'd weaponized her against me, knowing exactly what buttons she'd push, knowing exactly how her voice would affect me. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This wasn't even about tough love or consequences. This was warfare. And my son had just fired the first real shot. I looked at my phone, then slowly, deliberately, I saved the voicemail to the same folder where I'd stored his social media post. Evidence was evidence, and something told me this was just the beginning. If Marcus wanted to play dirty, he was about to learn that his old man knew a few things about strategy too. I poured myself a whiskey that night, the good stuff I'd been saving for some special occasion that never seemed to come. Sitting in my living room, surrounded by the furniture I'd bought piece by piece over the years, I finally allowed myself to see my life with brutal clarity. Julia had been right about one thing. She had wanted a better life. She'd dreamed of a bigger house, fancier cars, exotic vacations. When it became clear that my factory supervisor salary wasn't going to provide that lifestyle, she'd found someone who could. Richard something or other, a real estate developer with a BMW and a country club membership. Of course, Richard had dumped her 2 years later for his secretary, leaving Julia to bounce between rental apartments and part-time jobs. But somehow, that was still my fault. Everything was always my fault. My lack of ambition had driven her away. My weakness had corrupted Marcus. My selfishness was now causing everyone's problems. The funny thing was, I'd actually had ambitions once. Dreams of traveling, of seeing Europe, of maybe taking photography classes. But every spare dollar had gone to Marcus's needs. Every vacation day had been spent at his soccer games or school events. I'd postponed my own life so completely that I'd forgotten it existed. What if I stopped postponing it? The thought hit me like lightning. I was 54 years old, in decent health, with a pension that would kick in next year. This house, the house I'd worked 2 jobs to afford, the house I'd maintained and improved for decades, was worth 3 times what I'd paid for it. I could sell it, pay off the remaining mortgage, and have enough left over to do whatever I wanted. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Real estate lawyers, property valuations, market conditions. For the first time in years, I felt something that might have been excitement. My phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Marcus again, calling from another unknown number. "Dad, it's me again." His voice was different this time, smaller, less certain. The bravado from this morning had evaporated. "Marcus, look, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and maybe I was a little harsh yesterday. You know how I get when I'm stressed about job hunting and everything. A little harsh. The careful minimization, the passive voice, the complete lack of genuine accountability, it was like listening to a politician's non-apology. A little harsh, I repeated flatly. Yeah, I said some things I probably shouldn't have. But Dad, we're family, right? We can work through this. I just need a little help getting back on my feet, and then your mother called me tonight. The silence stretched so long I thought the line had dropped. What? Julia called. Apparently, you reached out to her about our situation. Dad, I can explain. She spent 20 minutes telling me what a failure I am as a father and a human being. Told me that everything wrong in your life is my fault, that I'm weak and pathetic and that I've abandoned you in your time of need. More silence. I could practically hear him trying to figure out his next move. I didn't ask her to say those things. I just told her what happened, and you told her your version of what happened. The version where you're the victim and I'm the villain. The version where calling me a useless burden was just you being a little harsh. Dad, come on. You know how Mom gets when she's upset. She says things she doesn't mean. The casual dismissal of her words he deliberately provoked, told me everything I needed to know about how little he understood what he'd done. Actually, Marcus, I think she meant every word, just like you meant every word yesterday morning. I took a sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through my chest. The difference is, I'm done pretending that abuse is love. Abuse? Dad, that's ridiculous. Nobody abused anybody. We had a fight. You called me a useless burden. You said you'd be better off without me. Then, when I gave you exactly what you asked for, you sicked your mother on me like a attack dog. That's not fighting, Marcus. That's manipulation. I was trying to, you were trying to hurt me enough that I'd fold and take you back. You weaponized the person who knows exactly how to make me feel worthless, thinking that would break me down. I stood up and walked to the window, sat looking out at the street where I'd lived for 15 years. Soon, maybe very soon, someone else would be looking out this window. Someone who wasn't carrying the weight of other people's ingratitude. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus. You're going to figure out how to support yourself like every other adult in the world. I'm going to live my life for the first time in decades. And if you ever try to use your mother against me again, you'll discover that I can play that game too, and I'm better at it than you think. Dad, please. I'm sorry, okay? I'm really sorry. Can we just... Good night, Marcus. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, I'd call that real estate lawyer whose website I'd bookmarked. It was time to start living for myself. For the first time in 32 years, the future felt like it belonged to me. The law office was exactly what I'd expected. Mahogany furniture, law books lining the walls, and the faint smell of expensive cologne. Attorney Mitchell Hartwell looked like Central Casting's idea of a real estate lawyer. Silver-haired, sharp suit, and the kind of handshake that suggested competence without being overly aggressive. So, Mr. Thompson, you're looking to sell your primary residence. Any particular reason for the urgency? Family circumstances have changed, I said carefully. I need to know if there are any legal complications if my adult son has been living there rent-free. We can handle that. Proper notice, documentation of the informal arrangement. How soon are you looking to list? As soon as possible. That afternoon, I called Marcus from Cafe Luna downtown, neutral territory, public space, somewhere he couldn't make a scene without consequences. Dad, he sounded surprised, hopeful even. I didn't expect to hear from you. I think we need to talk, face to face. Can you meet me here in an hour? Yeah, of course. Dad, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about everything. 1 hour, Marcus. He arrived 15 minutes early, which told me everything about his desperation. I watched him through the window as he paced outside, checking his reflection, running his hands through his hair. The same nervous energy he'd had as a teenager when caught in a lie. When he came in, he looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles, wrinkled clothes, the same shirt from yesterday. He was staying somewhere without a washing machine. Dad, thank you for calling. I know we both said some things, but I've had time to think. We both said some things. The false equivalency was starting already. I could see it in his eyes, that calculated look he got when he was preparing his defense, the same expression he'd worn as a teenager caught sneaking out. Sit down, Marcus. I gestured to the chair across from me. I ordered you coffee. He wrapped his hands around the cup like an anchor, hands shaking slightly. The tremor reminded me of his grandfather, my father, but his had come from years of honest labor, not from whatever this was. I realize I may have been unfair to you. The stress of job hunting, you know? Sometimes people say things they don't mean. I may have been unfair. Not I was wrong. The careful phrasing that admitted nothing while appearing contrite. I felt a familiar weight in my chest. The same disappointment I'd carried for years, always hoping this time would be different. I pulled an envelope from my jacket and placed it between us. Before you continue, I need you to look at this. His eyes fixed on it like it was dangerous, pupils dilating slightly. Some animal part of his brain was already sensing the threat. What is it? Open it. I watched his face change as he read, confusion melting into comprehension, then crystallizing into panic. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, the same helpless expression he'd worn at 12 when I'd found him breaking my tools in the garage. This says the house is being listed for sale. That's correct. Dad, what the hell? You can't sell the house. That's my home. His voice cracked on the word home, and for a split second I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. But the moment passed, replaced by indignant rage that anyone would dare disturb his comfortable existence. Your home. I kept my voice level, though my heart was pounding. Tell me, Marcus, what makes it your home? I live there. I've lived there most of my life. I live there. Not we built a life there or we made memories there. just the basic fact of his presence, as if occupying space created ownership. A young couple at the next table was arguing quietly about their wedding plans, completely absorbed in their own drama. The barista called out drink orders in a steady rhythm, normal life continuing around us while ours fell apart. You've lived there as my dependent for 32 years. I took a sip of coffee, buying time to steady myself. When did you start paying rent? You never asked me to pay rent. The defensive whine in his voice transported me back 20 years, the same tone he'd used when confronted about poor grades, missed curfews, broken promises. Nothing had changed except the stakes. I thought you were temporary, getting back on your feet. That was 8 months ago. The job market is tough. McDonald's is hiring. Walmart is hiring. The grocery store down the street needs baggers. Those aren't real jobs, Dad. I have a college degree. Those aren't real jobs. The words hit me like a physical slap. 37 years of fake work had supported his entire existence, but somehow it wasn't good enough for him to do. So did I, and I spent 37 years at the plant because real jobs pay bills and put food on the table. That's different. You didn't have the opportunities I have. My jaw clenched involuntarily. The opportunities I'd sacrificed everything to give him, dismissed as casually as yesterday's weather. What opportunities? You haven't worked in almost a year. You spend your days playing games and drinking beer. The afternoon light was slanting through the windows now, casting long shadows across our table. A businessman 2 tables over was typing frantically on his laptop, probably trying to meet some deadline. Everyone else was productive except my son. I've been networking, building connections online, waiting for the right position. Networking. I let the word hang, tasting its emptiness. You mean posting on social media about how unfair life is? His face flushed. Caught. How many times had I seen that exact expression when his excuses fell apart? You don't understand how the modern job market works. I understand that when I was your age, I had 3 jobs and a baby to feed. Work isn't supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be work. So I should throw away my education and flip burgers? The condescension dripped from every word. Flip burgers said like clean sewers. My throat tightened with suppressed anger. You want to talk about education? Let's talk about that college I refinanced my house to pay for. Twice. I watched the color drain from his face. Good. Maybe it was time he understood the real cost of his opportunities. I didn't know. When you were 8 and wanted Little League, I worked overtime for 3 months. When you were 16 and crashed your bike, I spent my Christmas bonus. We wore coats inside that winter, but you had your bike. Each memory felt like pulling shrapnel from an old wound. The coffee shop was getting busier as the afternoon wore on. Students settling in with textbooks, freelancers claiming tables with laptops, people building lives, pursuing goals, taking responsibility for their futures. When you dropped out at 22 with $30,000 in debt, I refinanced again. I'll be paying for your unfinished education until I'm 70. His hands were shaking harder now, coffee sloshing in his cup. The reality of what his choices had cost me was finally penetrating his protective bubble of self-justification. You never told me. Because I thought that's what fathers did. I thought love meant sacrifice, no matter how little appreciation you showed. The words came out harder than I'd intended. Years of resentment finally finding voice. A mother at a corner table was helping her young daughter with homework, patiently explaining multiplication tables. The kind of attention I'd given Marcus for years, the kind he'd dismissed as worthless. I was going to pay you back. You haven't made a single car payment, Marcus. Not one. 4 years of $428 a month while you call my life mediocre. I didn't mean it like that. But I could see in his eyes that he had meant it exactly like that. The casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to struggle, never had to compromise, never had to choose between his wants and someone else's needs. How did you mean calling your father's life pathetic? I was frustrated. Your situation is living rent-free in a 4-bedroom house, eating food you didn't buy, driving a car you didn't pay for. Most people would call that pretty good. An elderly man reading a newspaper glanced over at us, then looked away quickly. My voice had gotten louder without me realizing it. I forced myself to breathe, to find that cold center of control I'd been cultivating. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You're a grown man who's forgotten what responsibility feels like." The businessman closed his laptop with a satisfied expression. Deadline met, work completed. What would that feel like for Marcus? When had he last accomplished anything meaningful? "So you're going to make me homeless?" Make me homeless. As if I were the one creating this situation, as if his choices had nothing to do with it. "I'm going to stop enabling you. There's a difference. This is vindictive. You're punishing me for one argument." One argument? My voice rose despite my efforts. The mother with the homework looked over, protective instincts activated. "This is about years of entitlement, years of treating me like a bank account with legs." I forced my voice down, but the intensity remained. The coffee shop felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the weight of everything unsaid between us. "Is it fair that I'm 54 with nothing in retirement because every dollar went to you? That I haven't taken a vacation in 8 years? That I gave up a promotion because I didn't want to disrupt your life?" "I never asked you to do that." "You didn't have to ask. You just expected it." "Because you're my father." "I'm your father, not your slave." The words exploded out of me, carrying 32 years of suppressed frustration. The late afternoon crowd was shifting now, business people heading home, students settling in for evening study sessions. The rhythm of normal, productive lives while we sat trapped in this moment of reckoning. "Tell me what you've contributed to that house, Marcus." I could see him scrambling mentally, searching for something, anything to justify his presence. "I help around the house." "When? Name one thing you've done to improve it or make my life easier." Silence stretched between us while the coffee shop hummed with activity around us. Conversations, laughter, the hiss of the espresso machine. Life moving forward while we sat frozen in this moment. "I keep you company," he said finally, voice small. The pathetic inadequacy of it hit me like a punch. This was what 32 years of sacrifice had bought me, the dubious privilege of his presence. "When do you keep me company? You grunt at me if I try to talk, then disappear to your room." "I do care about you." "How?" "Give me one example from the past year." Another silence. I watched the realization dawn on his face. All those caring moments existed only in his imagination, projections of the son he thought he was rather than the person he'd actually become. "I'm sorry for not being a better son." The apology felt hollow, performative. How many times had I heard these same words, delivered with just enough sincerity to buy him another chance? "I don't need you to be a better son. I need you to be a man." The coffee shop was starting to empty as dinner time approached. Soon we'd be among the last customers, like actors in some twisted dinner theater performance. "I can change. Just give me another chance." "How many chances have you had? How many times have we had this conversation?" "This is different. Because the stakes are finally real?" I could see the desperation creeping into his eyes now, the dawning understanding that his usual tactics weren't working. "I called Mom because I was desperate." "Tell me what you told her that made her attack me for 20 minutes. He stared into his coffee, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Around us, the normal sounds of life continued, the clink of dishes, muted conversations, the whisper of pages turning. "I told her you threw me out for no reason." "For no reason." "I said you were overreacting to a little argument." "What else?" "Maybe that you were being too sensitive, having some kind of midlife crisis." So he'd painted me as unreasonable, unstable, cruel. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away, not just the betrayal, but the precision with which he'd aimed at my deepest vulnerabilities. You weaponized the person who knows how to hurt me most. The coffee shop had grown quiet around us. Most customers departed for dinner, leaving us in our bubble of dysfunction. I didn't think. You don't think about anyone but yourself. You don't think about how your words affect people. "I do love you, Dad." The words sounded empty, automatic, a reflex rather than a feeling. "Love is a verb, son. Your actions toward me have been the opposite of loving." He was crying now, real tears, but I'd seen him cry before when consequences loomed, the tears of someone who'd finally realized that this time, Daddy wasn't going to save him. "Where am I staying? In my car. Using birthday money, money you gave me." Even in his supposed independence, he was still living off my generosity. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. "This isn't punishment, Marcus. It's me finally teaching you to be a man. By abandoning me, by refusing to enable you, by refusing to be your safety net while you treat me like garbage. I stood up, pulling on my jacket. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden. Closing time for this chapter of our lives. The house will be listed next week. I'd suggest you start looking for alternatives today. I placed a 20 on the table and put my hand on his shoulder. For 32 years, a gesture of comfort. Today, feeling like goodbye. I hope someday you understand this is the first real gift I've given you. The chance to discover who you can be when you can't rely on anyone but yourself. As I walked away, his voice cracked behind me, desperate and young. Dad! Dad! Waze! But I kept walking, my footsteps steady on the tile floor. For the first time in 32 years, I was walking toward my own life instead of turning back to fix his. The evening air felt clean and full of possibility.